As you all know, Palworld is blown up, selling 5 million copies in its opening weekend, putting it nicely between Pokemon X and Y and Sword and Shield sales during the same release window. You can argue whether or not that's a fair comparison, as it's half the price of Pokemon and on a more generally available system, but January is also a hard month to sell entertainment in, so for the sake of this video, it has solidly beaten X and Y and is very close to Sword and Shield's first 3 days. Due to this massive level of success, along with the clickbait fan title of Pokemon with Guns, Palworld has unleashed what is possibly the dumbest Pokemon debate of all time. Unlike the arguments around the Generation 8 Pokedex cut or the Generation 9 gameplay issues, where each side can throw fairly valid arguments back and forth, the Palworld vs Pokemon debate has instead been overrun with the worst possible arguments either side could muster. What should be a fairly simple debate on how far-reaching copyright laws should be in the personal ethics of enjoying a product made by questionable means has devolved into an arms race to find the single most bullshit argument possible to embarrass yourself and further drift away from the other side. We're going to take a look at some of the arguments from both sides and their ridiculousness. The pro-Pokemon argument is obsessed with picking apart every single PAL to find a link to a Pokemon. Most PALs are pretty generic-looking fantasy creatures, like a deer but it's purple, or a deer but it's brown. Oh wait, that's just a deer. Or a deer but it has ice powers, or a basic fantasy fluffy dragon. There aren't that many you can point to as being a legitimate knockoff of Pokemon, but the ones that are a clear problem. I just wish people would stop diluting their evidence with gross overreaching, because it invalidates your point when you start just adding garbage to your argument. The Palworld response to this is that you should shut up and stop simping for a corporation, and that the Pokemon Company doesn't own the monster taming genre. So if you're upset about Palworld, just wait until you hear about Monster Rancher or Cassette Beasts. I absolutely hate both of these arguments. Let's start with the defending large corporations. This sort of argument is always the first reaction when someone knows they're in the wrong and would rather try and make you feel stupid than research a valid argument to change your perspective. The realm of politics is where people experience this the most often. If a candidate was to say something outrageous, like how dictators are very strong people who do no wrong and should always be above the law, and then you argue against that clearly deranged opinion, you're no longer viewed as a human with a differing thought. Congratulations, you've evolved into a sheep who deserves to be poor and work into your grave. No constructive dialogue is possible. And to a much more tame extent, this is where the Palworld debate has gone. Stop sucking up to a company as if they will ever care about you is a lazy response for someone who does not want to imagine the real-world consequences of no longer enforcing copyright laws. This debate should never be about, I like Pokemon, therefore Palworld is bad. It should be about the legitimate issues around if Palworld infringes on copyright. These laws go both ways. If you believe that a small developer should be allowed to rip off Pokemon's intellectual property because the game is fun, which it is, Palworld is a blast, then you must also believe it's acceptable for a large company to steal the content from everyday people and profit off of it. For example, you might love Shonen Jump, like who doesn't? But it would be illegal for Shonen Jump to steal the designs and critical aspects of my manga Maidral, or another publisher's IP, like Apple Black. Even if Shonen Jump put some amazing talent behind the project and created a very well-made Maidral knockoff, it's just as illegal as if they made a half-assed one. When it comes to copyright law, if we allow small companies to steal from large ones, we endanger the future of independent creators. It's not sucking up to the Pokemon Company, it's ensuring that we don't fall into a world where large companies like the Pokemon Company can blatantly steal from small creators. Comparing Palworld to other creature collecting games is honestly a strange one. The actual gameplay of Palworld is nothing like Pokemon. This debate would have made much more sense during the release of either Temtem or Coromon, but it's very important to notice that it did not happen to either of those games. By all measures but one, Temtem and Coromon are closer to Pokemon than Palworld is. The reason that is acceptable is because Pokemon has never owned the idea of creature collecting. In the same way that Halo and Rainbow Six can't sue each other over having guns in a mostly first-person perspective, Pokemon and Coromon are applying their own art styles and game mechanics to an already existing genre. Palworld's a survival game, and it does all the same things that other survival games do, so it's perfectly in the clear gameplay-wise. The only legitimate issue with Palworld is that this is a Raichu, this is an Electabuzz, this is a Lycanroc, this is a Quagsire, this is a Gmax Eevee, and this is a Cobalion. down to the pose, the typing, the personality, the extra design elements, and in some cases, literally the model itself. Even the pals that are essentially an AI combination of two Pokemon, like Goodra and Lilligant or Dragonair and Milotic, are probably in the clear because they are legitimately different from the originals in the same way that Chonktoad and Politoed are different. Or to bring up the ridiculous Dragon Quest comparison, in the same way that literally all of these are different. Games, movies, and manga take inspiration all the time. That has never been an issue, but it does become an issue if they're legitimately plagiarizing the work of another artist. Another argument that comes up a lot is that parody falls under fair use, and therefore Palworld is safe. I don't think anyone who says that knows anything about fair use or has played Palworld. This is a legitimate game. It's not meant to be a parody, like when PETA made Pokemon Black and Blue. We should also clarify what exactly fair use allows. Fair use allows someone to make use of a copyrighted work as long as they're adding something to it. So things like reviews, parody, and commentary. But this quickly gets into a gray area on sites like YouTube. So if I made a video with sarcastic comments about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet while using gameplay footage, like in my Pokemon breeding video, that would fall under fair use for commentary or review. But if I produced a feature film about Pokemon where my characters made sarcastic comments about the Pokemon in that movie, that would not be considered fair use. I cannot steal the intellectual property of Pokemon and use it in a commercial product. The gray area for YouTube is that even if you make money from your content, you're in this weird middle ground of being an individual following fair use laws and a broadcaster producing commercial content. The laws are funky, Canada's trying to make it worse for us, I won't spend too much time on it. But that's why there's often issues and disputes around if YouTubers and streamers can react to TV shows. On one hand, they're individuals engaging in transformational work, while on the other hand, they're broadcasting content they do not own and profiting off of it. Perhaps more interestingly, I'm sure many of you have art prints from an artist you really like. Copyright laws are very interesting around fan art because it's such good promotion for the IP that the IP holders almost never go after it, but selling Pokemon art or anime art is usually in violation of copyright laws. So where does this leave Palworld? The designs that skirt the line, like Discount Lucario, Zekrom, Zoroark, Jigglypuff, and Ninetales, are likely legal, while the model copying on Dire Howl, if proven true, might be one of the only things the Pokemon Company could legitimately go after. They can't go after Pal Spheres or Tower Bosses, the same way a third-person shooter couldn't go after defensive roles or weapon upgrades. This argument should really only be about how far-reaching copyright laws should be so that we can protect small businesses and independents from having their content stolen by large companies in the future, and if we are morally okay with some of the blatant ripoffs in Palworld. And weirdly, it teaches us that gamers who don't like the Pokemon gameplay formula are overwhelmingly happy to play a totally different genre of game that just happens to steal Pokemon designs. While on the flip side, Pokemon fans are incredibly unlikely to support Pokemon-style games like Coromon. And for the weird third side of this argument that it's a good thing for Nintendo because with this competition, maybe Game Freak will try harder, Game Freak owns a disgustingly small percentage of the Pokemon IP, and every year are whipped harder and harder by Nintendo to crank out as many Pokemon games as possible. If you want something to change in the mainline Pokemon series, your energy needs to go to management at Nintendo and the Pokemon Company, who set the schedules and cut content in mainline games. One day, I'll finally make a video about how depressing this whole setup is. In the meantime, how do you feel about Palworld? I think it's a very fun game that should probably alter like 20% of their designs, but overall, it's not this big culture war issue that people should be drafted into the Twitter army for. So, thanks for watching. Make sure to check out Maidral before a large publisher steals it, and we get to have this argument all over again, but reversed.